My name is Jeff Shaner, and I'm the product lead for our Field Apps group out of Redlands, California. And with me is Aaron Pulver. Aaron is the product owner for Tracker for ArcGIS. And we've got you captive for the next hour. We're going to lock the door, not let you leave. And we're going to talk about a new capability we're adding to the platform and the technology that's unlocking that. So with ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7, we introduced a new location tracking capability. And to fuel that, a new mobile solution called Tracker for ArcGIS. And I wanted to kind of whet your appetite by giving you a few examples of how it can be used and some of the ways we've already seen our customers using it. So a key aspect of location tracking is that it can be used to enhance situational awareness. And that started for us with the location tracking capability back at the start of this year with Pasadena Fire Department. If you were at the plenary of the conference, you probably saw a guy get up named Oscar Sepulveda, and Oscar talked about how he puts the wet stuff on the red stuff. So we worked with Oscar and his team to equip all of the responders that are within Pasadena Fire during the Rose Parade and the Rose Bowl football game. And that were the firefighters that were assigned engines, the firefighters that were assigned bike patrol, foot patrol, medic carts. But we also went a step further. We worked with the Tournament of Roses Parade, and we equipped all of the band directors and all the float drivers with Tracker on their smartphones. And for their use case, it was really about looking at the cadence of all of the floats and the procession of the parade and making sure that it was proceeding according to their timing and plan. So that was one of the first kickoffs, and it was an event-driven experience. And we've since then done it with the city of San Diego for the Rock and Roll Marathon, the LA Marathon. Aaron was able to go to the Super Bowl. He didn't play in the game, but he was able to support the efforts of various different security operations that would happen there. We did Canada's version of it, which is called the Grey Cup. None of us got to go to Mardi Gras, unfortunately, but Grey Cup? No. Mardi Gras? Oh, awesome. And there's some key aspects of it, right? Being able to display your last known location to enhance the security, medical, and event staff. In fact, I'm just going to flip over here and show you a live dashboard for the security of this event. Everyone that you see has one of these.
It's not showing up.
Oh, it's not showing up.
Kill your slide.
Do I need to what?
Stop the presentation.
Oh, I see. It doesn't handle the Mac stuff very well. Get out of this.
Swipe back to the...
It'll come. All that excitement. Can you see it now? Yes. So this is all the security around the convention center. We used it in the Hilton this last weekend. We used it here. We're using it here this week and at the party on Thursday night. They're all using these Sonam XP8 Android devices and trackers installed on them, and just passively recording and sharing their location. It's usable in a dashboard. Here you can see all of the ones that have been reporting in the last 30 minutes and a list of them. We also, just because of the security aspect of it, want to make sure they continue to report. So if there's a device that's running low on its battery, we want to be able to know about that and potentially contact those people. So we've got 4 devices that are running under 40% battery right now. In the GSOC we have that's set up, they're watching a dashboard like this, and they're talking to the security folks that are a part of the event. So let me try and get back to my slides. Needless to say, an event is one of the key driving use cases. And what's important about that is knowing the last known location of everyone that's involved in the event. And in that case of the Rose Parade, what they could do was build a dashboard like that, bring into the dashboard their CAD feed. So as soon as some incident were to occur, then they could find the nearest resource and dispatch them right there and then. Similar is a set of unplanned events. So in the emergency management context, being able to do a real-time or near real-time assessment is pretty key. We've worked with organizations like CAL FIRE, for example, that are responsible not only for mapping the defensible space around structures, but during an event, like a wildfire event, that same team is activated to go and document every damaged and destroyed structure. And they carry along devices with them or use other applications that record location tracks, and they'll store them as a GPX file perhaps, or a KML file. And then at the end of the day, when everyone comes in, they take those individual files, they merge them together, they upload them as a feature service, and then it's someone's job within the event to go and look at, did that inspector actually navigate around the structures? And if they didn't, then they have to send them back. So using a solution where those tracks are fed back directly into the situation unit, they can make near real-time decisions off of it, where it's been kind of a day-by-day process in the past. Another example, proof of work. So we have a number of colleagues, I'll just name one, his name's Craig Gilgrass, who likes to sit at the pub a lot. And if he was doing inspections at a utility, he'd be sitting at the pub doing those inspections, right? And you want to be able to prove that he was actually at the location of the work when he did the work. So being able to couple the tracking capability with other applications that we have, like Survey123 or Quick Capture or Collector, well, then you know the date timestamp of when the inspection occurred, and you have the date timestamp from the GPS log. You can do some simple buffer and intersect to find out whether they were in proximity of the work that needed to be done. That might be useful in the performance evaluations that your HR department's doing on a person like Craig Gilgrass. Not that there's anyone doing that on Craig Gilgrass right now that I know of. But it might be also from an audit perspective, right? So there's a lot of different reasons to be able to prove that work was done at the location it was being performed. Similarly, a number of you interact with contractors, and there's a certain level of service commitment that you agree to with those contractors, right? But how do you measure that level of service agreement? You don't really have any way to do that in most instances. They might have an AVL system on their vehicle, but that AVL system they own, well, actually they don't even own, they're purchasing it, and they often don't even get their own location tracks, right? And you, as someone who's receiving their service, how do you know that they went to the locations? And how do you know that they're spending that amount of time working for you? We've actually studied that in a couple of instances. One was with a petroleum customer that had a contract with a hauling company that said, we'll visit every well pad at least once a day, and we can guarantee 95% level of service. Well, in reality, they ended up getting about 60% of service. And they knew what days of the week they were not getting that service on, and it was a little bit scary, right? Because part of that is an inspection process and knowing the health of the wells and the assets that are on them. So being able to install a smartphone app on the contractor's device and have them turn on tracking so they record and share those tracks when they're employed by you is a way to measure that level of service commitment. Okay, so Tracker for ArcGIS. Tracker is the mobile solution that really brings this capability to life. And it's focused on recording and sharing those locations, doing it in a way that's optimized for low battery consumption, so you can spend a full day during the event, or in the instance of this, we're seeing almost 2 days worth of battery life on these units, and use the GPS and share information. And then record all of that inside of ArcGIS so that you can use the amazing analytics capabilities of our platform to detect patterns and use that data in very interesting and meaningful ways. Another example I didn't have on the slides was of a couple of forestry customers that we've talked to where they actually want to use the tracking application as a data mule. So they install it on the logging truck driver's device. They can have that person use it when they're driving the roads, and they know exactly what roads are actually being driven on. I mean, you could see all the roads from an ortho photo perhaps, but which ones are actually being driven and how much time is being spent on that? And maybe want to take those tracks and actually derive a new road network out of it. So there's some pretty interesting ways to leverage the data that gets collected. Okay, last thing in my long-winded speech before I get to Aaron, who's patiently waiting to show it to you, is what are those key components of this solution we've put together? Well, first is that mobile application. Aaron's going to show that to you next. That's really about recording those tracks on the device. It's running in the background. It works whether you're connected, whether you're disconnected. We've built it for iOS and Android platforms. The second aspect of it is the capability itself, the new location tracking capability. It's released for ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7 and higher, and it's coming to ArcGIS Online this fall. Inside of ArcGIS Enterprise, that requires the spatiotemporal big data store. That data store does not cost you anything more. Some people think it requires GeoEvent Server. It does not require GeoEvent Server. GeoEvent Server has just been one of the few products that's written to the spatiotemporal big data store. Now you have another one. You, as the administrator of your ArcGIS Enterprise portal, can just enable location tracking. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we have a Track Viewer web application. That Track Viewer web application you can use to kind of create these views of the location tracking service. It also has a visual component to it, so you can see the tracks and interrogate them if you'd like as well. All right, with that, let's pass it over to Aaron, and he's going to demonstrate the mobile app for you.
All right, so what we're looking at here is the Tracker iOS app. As you see, you open the app, you can see where you currently are, and you have this sliding panel here which provides the option to both stop and or start location tracking. So it's important to note that the user is always in control of when they're being tracked. There's a lot of privacy concerns around tracking people, and we want to make sure that people feel safe and secure and know that when they're being tracked. So they have the option to both start and stop tracking on their own. If we zoom into some of these tracks here on the convention center, you can start to see there's a couple arrows drawn, white arrows drawn on top of these blue lines. So you can see the direction of travel that I went this morning. Everything that we record, store, and upload is points. We render these lines both in the mobile app and in the web app on the client, but you can actually access the raw data here. So if I tap on one of these track line segments, I can see when I was at that location. I can see what my activity is, what my speed is, what my accuracy at that point was, and the actual coordinates themselves. So you might be wondering why we record activity. So we actually record the activity as part of optimizing the battery life. So when the device is stationary, like if I set it down here on the table and it's not moving, we stop requesting the GPS location from the device because we know it's not moving anywhere. So why bother requesting it? As soon as you pick up the device and you take a couple steps, we'll know, oh, they're not stationary anymore. We'll request the high accuracy location from the device, and that will give us that location. If we move the sliding panel up here, you can see there's a couple options. I can see tracks for today, for yesterday, for the last 48 hours, or for the last 72 hours. So if we show, say, yesterday's tracks, you can see the tracks just refreshed. I can zoom back out and see some additional tracks that weren't displayed before. So even though you can only see up to 72 hours of tracks at a time, any data that hasn't been uploaded is always cached locally on the device. Once that data has been uploaded, we still keep the last 72 hours on device at all times. If we jump over to the profile section here, there's a couple important options to take note of. So the first one is this reminders concept. So this allows someone that has a defined schedule, if they always work between 9 and 5, maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, in this example, they can configure this schedule to get notifications on their device of when they should start and or stop tracking. On Android, there's actually an enhanced capability to automatically start and stop tracking. We support multiple coordinate formats. So as you notice, I was showing latitude and longitude. If you need to use MGRS, National Grid, UTM, or these other formats, we support those as well. This is a common ask if you need to radio your location to someone else or copy it and send it in a text, something to that effect. We also support dark mode. This is a very nice feature if you're using Tracker in a low light situation. You need to open the app, you want to turn on or turn off tracking or configure your schedule. It's very nice to have a dark theme. It's pretty popular among our team. Additionally, this last known location property here, this lets you configure how frequently your last known location is updated to the server. So by default, it's every 60 seconds, but we provide the option to lower that to 30 seconds. This only affects your last known location. This does not affect how the tracks are collected. It does not affect when those tracks are uploaded to the server. So by default, all tracks on device are uploaded every 10 minutes. If the device is plugged in and charging and has a battery greater than 20%, it will upload tracks every 60 seconds. This is an optimization if your device is plugged into a car or a truck, for example. You can have those tracks available in an earlier fashion. And then this last option here is smart rendering. So by default, smart rendering is on. We can turn that off to actually see every single point in our map. And in San Diego and in the convention center and the hotel, a lot of times you'll get really inaccurate data. And so that toggle applies a strict set of filtering to really reduce the noise in that data. It's a very powerful thing that's enabled by default. And the last option here to take note of is upload. So as I mentioned, tracks are automatically uploaded on a set frequency, but if for some reason you do need to force upload, like you just came back to the office and you immediately need your tracks uploaded, you can force upload your tracks and your last known location. So this is the basics of the mobile app. You might have a couple questions on how tracks themselves are actually collected. So it's not based on time, it's actually based on distance between locations. So if you're walking, a point is collected approximately every 5 meters. If you're driving, a point is collected approximately every 30 meters. And if it's any other activity, it defaults to 10 meters. So this gives you a good spatial resolution for different types of activities. Turn it back over to Jeff to go over some more details.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so I think the key points to highlight in what Aaron just showed you is number one is that the mobile user is in control of when tracks are recorded and shared. We don't have any method for an administrator to be able to remotely control tracking, like when it's started and when it's stopped. The scheduling capability is something that's there to help you in that regard. There is a difference in behavior between iOS and Android, and that's a technical limitation of the Apple platform. The iOS platform throws up a reminder to you that it's time to start or stop tracking. Where on the Android platform, we can enforce it. So when it's time, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, Tracker automatically starts recording tracks. We just can't do that on the Apple platform. Hopefully in an update from Apple sometime, we'll be able to do that. At least that's what the devs tell me. As Aaron kind of mentioned, we want to keep this this similar coarseness or granularity to the tracks, and that's why it's distance-based. And that's been a source of confusion for some people that look at the upload frequency. So just know that that's the time at which it takes for you to synchronize tracks. It's, every 30 seconds, every 60 seconds, or as noted here, every 10 minutes, or we've plugged in every 60 seconds. Boy, I made that sound really confusing too, didn't I? The only thing I think that's on this slide that I haven't mentioned is that Tracker, the mobile application, is a premium app. So it's probably not included in your ELAs. And you should talk to your account team about what that costing would be for you. You should know that the Tracker app's available for any user type though. So if you want to use a viewer user type and get the Tracker license for it, then you can do that. You don't have to have an editor or a field worker or anything like that.
What about Hub? Does it work with any of the Hub licensing models? I know almost nothing about it.
That's a great question, and I know absolutely nothing about Hub either. The question was, what does it mean with the Hub licensing? And I have absolutely no idea. But that's something we can get back to you on. Yeah, and we can post that information for you. We do have a bunch of resources out there with an FAQ and whatnot, so we'll make sure that that's publicly available. Great question. So the other thing I wanted to mention, and Aaron showed this, is about viewing the tracks on the device. You can view them up to 72 hours. Of course, we're storing them as long as your device is offline, right? So if you're offline for a couple of weeks or whatever, all the tracks are stored locally on the device, but we'll only view the last 72 hours. The next thing we're doing really is that we're working on getting the other applications to be able to read that local store of tracks. So in that example of where maybe you're doing inspection workflows and you're focused on making sure that you're covering an area, this is at the role of the field worker, and you want to make sure that you've covered a neighborhood, maybe you're doing inspections of a service line or whatnot, and you want to see those tracks that you've covered on the device. If Tracker's installed, it will just appear as another layer inside of your map, which you can turn on. And then there'll be the capability within the Tracker app to remotely control, a capability within the Collector app to remotely control the Tracker app. And that functionality will add to all of the applications as we move forward. And third-party applications can consume the location tracking service too if you want. The location tracking service is just a feature service, right? So you can add it to a web map and start to use it. In fact, Explorer for ArcGIS can be a good mobile situational awareness app because you could add the tracking layer to that mobile app or to that web map, open it up in Explorer and see where your other field workers are. And there's a caveat to that, well, not a caveat, a condition to that, and there's security and privileges around the sharing of the location tracks as well. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So the last thing I wanted to mention before we get to the back office components of Tracker is to highlight that privacy thing one more time, because with all the stuff that's going on in the media these days, it's really important, not just from a personal privacy perspective, which you'll face when you start to introduce this capability to your organization, but also from the corporate aspect, right? Know that with the ArcGIS Enterprise, you're in complete control of the tracks and where they're stored, right? They're stored behind your firewall, inside of your portal, inside of your data store, and only you have access to them unless you want to share them with others. We do have some competitors, I won't mention any specific names, that provide tracking APIs, but if they provide that API to you, and some of them do it for free, then that organization has the right to keep your tracks and sell your tracks. So just keep that in mind. When we introduced the ArcGIS Online capability, I guess technically the tracks are stored inside of our data store, but Esri has no intent to use those tracks or manage those tracks in any way, just like all the rest of the data that you store and manage inside of ArcGIS Online. All right. Is that enough legal disclaimer? Is the legal person in the team? Okay. So I'm going to pass it back over to Aaron, and he's going to talk about track views.
So what we're looking at here is the Track Viewer web application. It's an app designed to help administrators both configure track views, share those track views, and then also visualize tracks, which we're doing right here. So this is what you'll see when you open a track view. We're looking at some data in the greater San Diego area here. On the left-hand side, we have a panel here with different options for filtering and highlighting. Right now, we have this user panel selected. So I can actually go ahead and select a couple of these users. I'll select myself, I'll select Eric, and we can see that it'll actually paint those users' colors in the track. This allows us to visually inspect both multiple users at a time as well as specific users in our organization. So if I actually zoom in to a section of tracks here, I can hover over these tracks and we can actually see all the points that are used to build the lines. I can click on one of these points and see different attribute information. So we know who this person is, we know when they were at that location, we know their battery percentage and the state of their battery. We know that they were walking at 2.3 miles per hour. They were walking in a southeast direction, and that point has an accuracy of 26 feet. So we can actually kind of travel along the line here if we want to really dig in to specific points or areas where someone traveled. If I close this pop-up, we can move over here and look at some of the options. So the first one is the time span. So by default, we're showing the last 8 hours of tracks, but we can show maybe the last 24 hours by applying a new filter here. So this is actually querying those extra tracks, and if we zoom out, you can now see there's quite a few more tracks displayed in the map. The third thing here is the accuracy filter. So we can add an additional accuracy filter to further clean up our tracks. So you might notice right now it doesn't look that bad, and that's because we have smart rendering enabled. This is the same feature that we have on the mobile app. So if we turn that off just for a second, you can see that there's a lot of really inaccurate data. And this is kind of by design. We upload all the points that we record, and we leave it up to you guys to decide what is valid data and what is invalid. And we provide some options such as smart rendering to help reduce that noise. So here we can apply an accuracy filter, and it will even remove some more tracks. If we reset that, we can go down to the speed. So here I can further refine and highlight my tracks based on the speed. So we might want to do between, say, 2 and 5 miles per hour because almost all the tracks are walking in San Diego. And you can see that certain areas are faded out and certain areas have a darker highlight. And those darker highlights represent areas that meet the current filtering criteria. So we'll clear that out, and then the last filter here is activity. So we can visualize when someone was driving, walking, stationary, or they don't have a known activity. So for example, we can highlight walking. So almost all these tracks are walking, but you might notice that down here they're faded out. And this is because, in this case, someone was driving or taking a scooter or something. So you might be wondering, how do I create one of these track views and what is a track view? So if we jump back here, this is the list of all the current track views in my organization. So I'm signed in as an administrator, and I have the ability to create a track view. So a track view consists of a couple things. It consists of a list of mobile users whose tracks will be displayed in this track view, and it also contains a list of track viewers who have access to view those tracks, and then it finally will create this group which that content will be shared into. So this is how we can configure a mobile user. So these are the people that I want to see. So I want to see myself, maybe I want to see Jeff Jackson, and then maybe I want to see Eric again. Oops, if I type. So we can add those 3 users, and what this is doing is actually adding them to the view definition query of the feature layer. And so only these 3 users will be displayed in this track view, regardless of where it's used in the platform. I can add additional track viewers. So these might be supervisors, they might be managers, they could be other administrators as well. Maybe I want to add Craig as a track viewer, so I can add him. And now this track view is configured. We have 2 track viewers and we have 3 mobile users. So we can open this track view, click on one of these users here and zoom back into their tracks and see the same thing that we saw before. So you can see how it's pretty straightforward to create a track view.
Only from your organization, or can you invite in non-organizational members?
The question is, can you invite non-organizational members into your track view? And the answer is no. Tracker only supports users in your own organization. I'll turn it back to you.
Back to me.
Does it do Global and, Enterprise and Arceus Online?
The question was, does it do Arceus Enterprise and Arceus Online? Arceus Enterprise was released with version 10.7 and higher, so 10.7.1 now. Arceus Online, I didn't mention this part of it. It's not released yet. Our plan is to release it in the fall, but in a couple of weeks, we're starting a beta program. And that beta program will basically, inside of your organization, unlock the location tracking capability, and then we'll provide you with a set of licenses. So if you're interested in participating in the beta program, there's a tracker for ArcGIS alias. I'll put it up at the end of the session here on the last slide. And you can email us and then apply for that beta program. If you just Google location tracking coming to ArcGIS Online, you'll find a blog article that talks about that too.
Was that a part of the early adopters already?
It is a part of the early adopter program, yeah. But we want to funnel everything through the alias so that we can manage it accordingly. So if you email us, it'd be best. Thank you.
Quick on the licensing. So is it a license per track viewer or per mobile user or each?
To clear up the question of licensing, the licensing applies only to the mobile user. It's a fixed per cost per year against any user type, including the viewer. To use the track viewer web application, all you need to be is a viewer, right? To be someone who creates a track view, let me qualify that because it's also on the slide. You need to be a viewer, plus you need to be able, you must have the view tracks privilege enabled, and Aaron's going to show that to you in a little bit. To create the track views, you have to be an administrator. But there's no additional licensing. The only licensing is on the mobile application. Makes sense?
Are there any plans to come out with Windows?
Great question. Is there any plans to come up with a Windows version? We've been looking for that feedback here this week. So we don't have a plan, like a development plan for it yet. We're kind of taking Windows as we go. Windows 10 adoption hasn't been very high across any of our applications, so we want to be conservative on the approach that we take there. So if you're interested in Windows, and Windows is the platform for you, we really want to know about that. So thank you for the feedback.
Is the GPS only tied just to the device, or can you have GNSS?
The question was, is the GPS tied to the device, or could you use like an external GPS receiver? Yeah, you could totally use an external GPS receiver. It just has to, as soon as a device Bluetooth pairs to your smartphone, then that is the feed that we get. I'm going to continue on just so we make sure we get the rest of the slides done, and then we can get your question after, if that's all right. I think that we pretty much covered everything from the administrative perspective. And Aaron showed you most of the capabilities of the viewer, the supervisor's view of the application as well. And all the filters are really derived based upon the schema that we have within the location tracking data that gets stored, right? But as you saw, like when we very first started this presentation, it's not the only place you can view those tracks, right? We store them all as points. There's 2 layers. The tracks layer has the full location history. The last known location layer, which is great for situational awareness, is just updating the last known location of each person's position. And you could put that into a dashboard and use it in dashboard. And Aaron's going to show you some of the cool analytical things you can do as well. Aaron's going to show this to you as well, so I don't need to spend much time on it, but if you're the administrator and you want to use location tracking, in the settings application, you can just enable location tracking. There's a new tab in the user experience, and you can turn it on. And then the other important aspect to think about in all of this, as you see Aaron demonstrate it, is that there's a retention period for the tracks. Tracks can get pretty voluminous, right? There's going to be a lot of data stored. So you need to think about how long do you need to keep that data for. We'll help you with that by letting you set a retention period. Maybe it's 30 days, maybe it's 60 days. With ArcGIS Enterprise, you can make it forever if you want, but then you have to manage that bloat that happens inside of the data store. You might want to archive that data out as well into your own repository. So think about your standard business process around location track data management, I guess. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it back to Aaron.
All right, so what we're looking at here is the organization page for an administrator. So if you are an administrator and you sign in and you go to the settings tab here, as Jeff mentioned, there's this new location tracking tab. If you haven't enabled location tracking already, you'll see this enable location tracking button. All you have to do is click this, click continue, and now it's going to create that location tracking service in the spatiotemporal data store, or if you're in online, it will provision that feature service for you as well. It will then share that item with everyone in your organization so that anyone that signs into the mobile app can upload tracks. So I'm going to jump over to this Tracker 8 portal that we've been running for several months, just to show you some of the settings that we have configured right now. So you can see it was first created on February 13th, 2019, so you know when it was enabled, you know who enabled it, and then you can also see how long these tracks are being stored for. So right now, we're keeping our tracks all the time. We're not removing any of them, but if we wanted to, we could change this to 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, 1 year, or you can even update this through the REST API to a custom value. You can click Open Track Viewer to launch a Track Viewer app that we just displayed. And then down here, this shows the list of roles that are able to view other people's tracks. So as Jeff mentioned, there's a new privilege introduced called View Location Tracks. And this privilege is required if you want to see anyone besides your own tracks. So we can actually look at that new privilege really quick. So here, I've just opened the Members tab, and you can see this privilege here under the Content section called View Location Tracks. And so you just make sure that that's enabled for anybody that wants to view other users' tracks. Additionally, down here, there's the ability to pause location tracking and disable location tracking. So pausing basically allows you to keep all of your data, but stops new data from being uploaded to the service. This could be useful in a few scenarios, like if you need to sort out some legal issue or privacy issue, you could temporarily pause location tracking and then re-enable it without losing any of your previous data. If, however, you do want to disable location tracking, this will remove all of your data, all of the services, all of the views. It'll essentially reset it as if it was never enabled at all. So the location tracking service, as mentioned earlier, has two feature layers. So what we're looking at here is the actual service, and you can see there's a tracks layer here and a last known location layer. If we jump over to the data tab, we can take a look at all the fields that are collected. So we collect all sorts of different attributes, including the activity. So that could be walking, driving, cycling, the altitude, the app that wrote the track data. So in this case, it's Tracker, but in the future, it could be other apps. We record battery percentage, the battery state, the direction, device ID, the floor if the building has been mapped by Apple or Google. Accuracy, the location source. So this could be Wi-Fi, GPS, or fused. This is only available on Android. And then obviously the location timestamp. We have added these two fields here, session ID and signal strength, just for future use. They're not being used right now. And then finally, we have speed, vertical accuracy, and then the editor tracking fields, so we know who created these track points. So we've seen tracks in Track Viewer, but here we're actually showing that same track data in a web map. So because location tracking is an organization-wide capability, you can use these views and the service in all the other apps from Pro to Map Viewer to Operations Dashboard. So here we're actually looking at all the historical tracks, and then these green profile images represent the current location of these users. And as Jeff mentioned earlier, and you saw in that other dashboard, we can actually see where people are in real time. So right now we're tracking several people on our team, and we can see where they last were and where they've gone throughout their day. You might notice there's a couple filters applied up here. So by default, we're showing tracks for today, but we could extend dashboard to show tracks for yesterday or any kind of custom date time range. And we also have an accuracy filter applied. So this is very similar to what you saw in the Track Viewer web app. So now I'm going to kind of dive into analyzing some tracks and show you what's possible. So I'm a big fan of Jupyter Notebook. And we're going to go through this notebook to both visualize and then dig deeper into some track data that was previously recorded. So here I'm going to sign in to my enterprise deployment. And then we're going to access a track view that has data from the Esri Developer Summit in March. We can see who is in this track view immediately. So this is a list of users that are being tracked. So you can see there's myself, there's Craig, quite a few other users. Let's actually see what these tracks look like in this notebook. So we're going to pull down data between March 4th and March 8th and render that here in the map. And you might notice, oh, there's some data way out here that looks kind of interesting. Like, why are there tracks there? It doesn't look normal. So we can actually go ahead and apply an additional filter to this map. So we're going to filter based on the horizontal accuracy and only show points that have an accuracy better than 100 meters. So when this renders, you can see that most of those invalid points have been removed. Maybe we want to take a look at and see where most people went during this conference. So we can add a simple heat map renderer to this map. You can do all of this analysis in Pro or in the map viewer. You don't have to do it in the notebook. I just want to make that clear up front. So we can actually zoom in a little bit here to get a better view of what's going on. And you can see there's kind of a hot spot here around the convention center, another one around the Hilton Hotel, and then another hot spot around the Hyatt Hotel. So maybe there's something going on at these three places. So we can actually leverage the geoanalytics server to analyze this data further. So the geoanalytics server, it's a distributed it uses distributed computation to handle big data analysis. And one of the tools that they provide is this aggregate points tool. And what this does is it will create hex bins, or you can configure it to do other shapes as well. And it will aggregate the number of track points per hex bin, and you can do other attributes, like if you wanted to plot where accuracy is really high or really low, you could do that as well. So we're going to run that tool here, and you can see through the logs that it's actually distributing across multiple cores, and it's created a new layer, and we're going to render that layer here in the map. So we can see, based on this analysis, that yes, it does appear that there's a significant number of points in this area, and the area on the left. Still doesn't really tell us like statistically what's going on there. So we can run another tool from GeoAnalytics server called Find Point Clusters. And here we're going to actually run a DB scan algorithm. And so this will give us the clusters that have statistical significance. So this is a little more data science heavy, and actually is backed up by statistics rather than just visualization. So what's going on here? It's actually doing the same thing it did before, just distributing that computation across multiple cores. And if you do have multiple GeoAnalytics servers configured, it can go across multiple servers as well. So this might take a couple of seconds here to complete, but when it's done, we'll see all of these points classified into either one or more clusters, or might not even be in any cluster at all. So this is the result. So you can see here, there is indeed a statistically significant cluster in this area in orange. There's another one in green, and then there's another one on the left in pink. So this just shows how you can actually leverage these analytics tools to really dig into the data here. As you might have noticed in the map viewer in the dashboard, you saw all the points. Maybe you want to actually see these track lines like you can in the mobile app and in the track viewer web app. So we can run a similar tool called Reconstruct Tracks, and what this does is it takes a unique ID for every person that's being tracked. So we're using the created user field to identify a unique track. We specify a time boundary and a distance split boundary, and we leverage those so that we can regenerate lines and store those as a new feature layer in our enterprise. So what you see here, these are actually lines that are stored and rendered here. I can click on one of these lines and actually see information about that, such as how many points are in that line, who that line represents, and some other summarized attributes. So maybe we want to actually dig into a specific user's track data and see what they did at the conference. So here I'm going to render my own tracks as lines. And you can see that I mostly went to the convention center and my hotel, and then a couple other areas like restaurants and whatnot. So here, I'm going to actually show a data table of all the attributes that are available. So we can do a lot with this data. So this is a pandas data frame. It has all the attributes that we just looked at, including battery percentage. So here, I'm going to quickly convert from UTC time to Pacific time so that the date time plot that I'm about to do will be accurate. And here, we're going to actually plot the battery percentage over time for my tracks at the conference. And so you can see here, we started out on the 4th. My phone was charged. It drained down to around 65% or so, and then I plugged it in, and it recharged all the way back up to 100%. Same thing the next day, it just went down to 35%, and then it recharged all the way. So you can leverage all these different analytics to actually really dig deep into the tracker data and solve real-world problems. If you're interested in the accuracy, here's a simple histogram showing how accurate that data was. So for the most part, it was less than 20-meter accuracy, which is pretty good. And for some reason, there is a spike here around 60 to 65 meters. So maybe we want to dig deep into that to figure out what was going on, maybe where that location was. Was it in the airport? Was it in the conference center? We could do something like that. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here and show some different tracks. So this is from the same portal, but this is in Portland, Maine. So this is actually showing my drive to or from work one day. And we can actually visualize the speed of that travel here by adding a custom renderer. So what you see here, the dark red areas represent a high rate of speed, and the light red areas represent a lower rate of speed. So we can visualize where I was going fast and where I was going slow. But maybe we want to actually dig into how I was driving. Like, was I accelerating very quickly in some cases, or was I braking very quickly in other cases? So we can run a tool called Calculate Fields. Again, this is a geoanalytics tool. And this tool takes an arcade expression. And in this arcade expression, we are comparing we're finding the acceleration between two consecutive points in a track. And this is going to output a new feature layer, and then we're going to render that feature layer to actually visualize where I braked hard or I accelerated quickly. So you can see in this map here, there's some dark red areas, some green areas, and some yellow areas. So the red points represent hard braking, the green areas represent hard acceleration, and then the yellow points represent something in between. It's a little hard to see here, so we can apply a quick filter to this web map and find that, oh, there's 4 points where the acceleration was less than or equal to negative 2 meters per second. So that represents somewhere where I braked pretty quickly. So this just kind of walks through how you can dig into this track data to solve real-world problems. And then I just want to quickly highlight that if you are interested in this, these examples and some others are available on our GitHub repository if you wanted to run some similar analysis. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff to wrap things up.
Thanks, Aaron. So the only thing I wanted to highlight before we wrap up is the schema aspect of Tracker. As you saw, everything that Aaron just showed you was leveraging all the rich set of attributes that are a part of the tracking scheme. And we fully document the tracking schema on our documentation website, so you can have a look at it and see what information's there and useful for you. We've also seen some organizations start to enrich this tracking schema by marrying it with geo events, or in some instances even COOP, so that you could take perhaps like a survey service or a collector feature service, take the identity out of that, like the created user and an inspection or a state of that person, marry it to the tracks service, and derive essentially a joined service that provides much more detail than what's just stored on the location track. So something to think about there. And to that degree, both geo events and geoanalytics are good complements to the location tracking capabilities. With geo events, you have geofences, and you could take advantage of tracker just like you could in the other feed going into it. And obviously with geoanalytics, you've got all of these rich capabilities to detect patterns in the data. Okay, so it's a brand new product, but what's coming next? ArcGIS Online support is our focus right now. Just so you know, there's no additional data store you'll need to set up or build or anything for the ArcGIS Online version. Just like hosted feature services, that's handled for you. One of the things that we're doing as part of this beta program is starting to look at what are ultimately the transactional costs to us in this, because we're using a for-fee data store. So we don't want to change the business model on it. We want to study what happens with a beta program and keep things down to, you pay for the tracker premium app license and that's it. But what we might try to do is, depending on what we find, is throttle the retention period. So that maybe as the storage costs increase for us, that we would require that you export that data out. All these things are just discussions in our own minds right now, but when we get closer to release, we'll have that sorted out. And then what's next for us after that? We've been looking at, just even from these event use cases, is how do I attach more information about the person to the tracks that get recorded? Like in the Rose Parade case, that firefighter has a role in the event. Maybe he's part of a medic team or part of a bike team, but every other day of the week, he's part of an engine company. Well, you need to be able to attach aspects of his profile and his role to his location. So the best way to do that, where everything's an insert into the database, is to have more information attached to his identity. So we're looking at how do we provide that through future updates. The integration with the other apps is pretty key. So as we start to update other applications like Collector and Workforce and others, we'll add that ability to read those local tracks. And then we've already talked about geofencing. Geofencing is a capability that we need to bring to all of our mobile applications. It'll probably start with this one. And the important part about geofencing being part of our mobile applications is that you need to be able to execute the rules and business logic around a geofence, even when you're offline, right? It's important for that mobile user to have that trigger on their device as well. And GeoEvents doesn't have that kind of capability. It's more about back-end processing. So we'll be working with that team. We'll figure out how do we bring geofences to the mobile device. You'll see it come into Tracker. You probably see it come into a lot of our field apps pretty soon too. With that, I wanted to put this up. Hopefully you really liked our presentation and you'll give us really good feedback using the app. If not, then my name is Craig Gilgrass. This is Doug Morgenthaler, and you should just ridicule them for all the bad stuff that they did in their presentation. I think we have a few minutes for questions still, and I want to get this guy's question over here first because I stopped him before. Yeah.
Yeah, can you like integrate a view into dashboards for like specific people that have views like their direct reports?
So the question was, could you integrate direct views or views directly into dashboard almost like a supervisor dashboard of those people they report? Absolutely. Like the views that we created, you saw that there was a number of mobile users that were being tracked in the view. And then there was the supervisors that have the right to view the tracks. That gets shared into a group. The dashboard, you just add that specific view as a layer into the web map. And then only the supervisor has the right to view those tracks based upon their identity. And they're seeing the tracks of the people they supervise. So yes, absolutely. Yes.
So I had a question like for public safety and search and rescue. Say you need to scale up to 100 users of Tracker and they're not part of your organization. And you want to allow them to put that on their phone, then they go out and they search grids and all that other stuff. And then capture all their tracks, you know their location, and then they go away as a user. Is that going to be part of the licensing model for like Arceus Online or for Enterprise that you can have short-time use licensing, I guess, is what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really around the licensing during an event where there's people involved in the event that aren't a part of your organization, right? And that's an agreement that you need to talk about with our public safety team and your account manager there. They have all kinds of provisions for that event-driven kind of scenario, I guess, for lack of a better word, with our licensing. And they're best to answer that, so I defer to them on that. Thanks. Yes?
A question on if you could comment on the use of this solution in more of a tactical type situation where you really need near real-time location, like working a protest or something like that. Is this a suitable solution?
Okay, the question was really about the tactical use of location tracking where you need frequent updates. Right now, we talked about Tracker being able to upload the last known location every 30 seconds, right? And that's the frequency that we've chosen with it to date because we also want to conserve battery life. We haven't considered updating that so that it was configurable to, a couple of seconds or that kind of use of it. So something we can look at, but right now just know that the most frequent upload you're going to get is 30 seconds.
That's with plugged in or?
30 seconds is on that last known location layer, so if you really want to know where someone's at, it's going to update every 30 seconds. Oh, and in a very important part of that right now too, is that it's based upon movement, right? So this device, if it's just sitting here stationary, isn't updating, right? So if that person's not moving, you're not going to get an update. That's something that we are looking at because I think it's really important. We've discovered that through the stationary guards that are here. We're thinking about how we can also just even update the location timestamp. We don't need to fire up the GPS to do it. The guy in the back there, he had his hand up a few times and I missed him.
So the old version of Collector had built-in tracking that we used a lot of, and we were surprised when the new version of Collector took that out. So moving forward, in order to track people, we're going to have to get Tracker and pay for it.
Oh, so that sounds like a really angry question. So we had, to try to repeat the question, we had location tracking capability inside of Collector. And we've built a new collector, and that new collector doesn't have location tracking capabilities in it. Now you're making me pay for it, damn it. That's a great point. I don't think there's a back door that I can, maybe there's a window I can jump out of. And of course, Chris pointed out that Workforce had the same location tracking capability. Both had their limitations. For now, I want you to know that across our field applications, we've been in, to be honest, it feels like we've been climbing Mount Everest, right? Collector's been going through an evolution. Workforce is going through an evolution. We're trying to get at parity to where we were previously and then evaluate the best way to go moving forward. We knew that we had to build an efficient tracking capability. We built and released that in the Tracker app first, but we're also building this kind of micro framework where we can share components across apps. And we're looking at where does it get pushed down to the runtime. So don't think that we're trying to do this to make more money off of you. We're trying to build software, and we're trying to make it the most efficient and best we can. And we might bring that back in as a capability into Collector. We're just not there yet. So for now, you can continue to use Collector Classic. You can continue to use the existing version of Workforce. And then beat us up if we don't get that capability back into the product.
Well, I guess just for feedback, you know, this stuff is great, but we don't need it. So we're being forced to pay for something we're not going to use. We just need to know where people work.
Yeah.
So if there's like a free version that only does X, Y or something,
Yeah.
keep that in mind.
Okay.
That could be painful.
Thank you. I'm afraid to point at Joe.
Yeah, just to follow up to that, I thought Aurora was going to fix that problem. I'm just wondering if that's still coming.
If Aurora was going to fix that problem. So with Collector, we've been evolving the product, and we've used the code name Aurora for that. I think I mentioned earlier that Aurora will be able to consume location tracks. The problem we have with the location tracking in Collector right now is that it doesn't work in the background, right? One of the things we can think about is how do we accommodate the licensing and have the two applications work together. Another solution is we bring the technology together. We'll sort that out.
So with the integration that's coming with Collector, you would need to have Tracker license?
Yes, with the integration right now. As it stands right now, if you were to use Tracker to do location tracking, you'd use the new version of Collector on iOS, because it's out on iOS, and you'd use the two of them together. That's the current solution. And that would mean that you have an editor license for Collector as a minimum, and then you would have to buy the premium license for Tracker, right? I kind of said that wrong. Editor user type. Tough crowd. Okay, yes, back here.
So sorry to keep harping on this, but what is the actual price of the license?
Oh, now you're asking me to answer to pricing? I am not touching that one because I'm sure there's distributors. I don't know. You have to talk to your account manager on that. The U.S., if you're in the U.S., that licensing is on our webpage, and you can go look at it. I'm not going to give you a dollar value, but it's, I think, pretty cheap. I don't know. Yes?
If I'm not trying to do any analytics, as I understand, I have to install only the spatial temporal data store, and that's it?
Yes, that's all you need. If you're not going to use any analytics, all you need to do is install the spatiotemporal big data store on a server, and then it writes to it.
And the layer itself is a feature layer?
It's a feature service with 2 feature layers inside of it.
So I can use it in 3D as well?
Yes, yes, it has. We didn't show any 3D.
Yeah, just to clarify on that, so the geometry is captured as 2D, but we store the altitude, so you can still use that in like 3D JavaScript applications.
Know that if you're using like an iPhone, that 3D position is kind of crappy. You could improve it if you get an external receiver, but you're at the mercy of it. I would ask, in case anybody else is, or I would say, in case anyone else is going to ask this, that today the ArcGIS Indoors app does support location tracking, and it does have an indoor capability for positioning. That's unique to the Indoors application right now, but we've been talking to that team about how do we bring that, that blue dot into all of our field applications as well. Yes, back there.
If you wanted to use a data store like Pi, example, could we go straight to Pi, or would we have to go to the data store and then do like a transfer?
I don't even know what pi
Yeah,
is.
can you expand what that?
Oh. I don't think so. I mean, we're
Yeah,
writing
so-
to our data store.
Yeah.
OSI Pi is, yeah, I mean, you could take the feed and then send it over to Pi, but we're writing to our own data store directly. Yeah. Okay, I think with that, I'll shut down the questions. If you have any more questions, you can come up to us. Thank you for attending.